This is A Word, a podcast from Slate. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. Football legend Deion Sanders shook the college football world by announcing that he's leaving historically black Jackson State University to coach at the University of Colorado. Is Sanders a smart operator or a sellout? And what does the move mean for black college athletics?
I can't deny, this idea that he's human, right? And, if there's a better offer, he has to take that under consideration.
Deion Sanders and the future of black college athletics coming up on A Word with me, Jason Johnson. Stay with us.
Onnit's Black Friday sale is now on. Discover our lowest prices at our biggest sale of the year with up to 60% off, including 25% off supplements, 10% off fitness, 20% off nutrition, and more. The sale ends December 4th, so make sure to save big while supplies last. Learn more at onnit.com. Coupons and codes do not stack on top of sale discounts.
Welcome to A Word, a podcast about race and politics and everything else. I'm your host, Jason Johnson. Hall of Fame football star Deion Sanders shook the world of college sports in 2020 when he announced that he would coach the struggling program at Jackson State University in Mississippi. Sanders brought major recruits, on-field success, and a national spotlight to the JSU Tigers. Sanders described taking on the job at Jackson State as a religious mission in a 60 Minutes interview earlier this year.
I truly believe with all my heart and soul that God called me collect. And I had to accept the charges.
You accepted the charges.
I had to accept the charges. But understanding when you accept those type of charges is going to cost you something.
What's it cost you?
A lot of sleep. But I can't say I don't love it. I love every darn minute of it.
Well, now Sanders is taking his love of the game to the University of Colorado. And that's left fans of JSU football and of historically black colleges and universities devastated. Some critics are calling him a sellout, while other folks are supporting his decision to take a huge jump in salary and resources. But why did the loss of Deion Sanders at JSU spark a national conversation anyway? And what does it say about the future of HBCUs, specifically in athletics? Joining us to talk about it is Billy Hawkins. He's a professor at the University of Houston and author of The New Plantation: Black Athletes, College Sports, and Predominantly White NCAA Institutions. Billy Hawkins, welcome to A Word.
Thank you, Jason. I'm glad to be here.
For people who don't know much about college athletics, what did having Deion Sanders as a coach mean to Jackson State University? Like, what did that actually just mean?
Well, I think it meant a lot of things. It still means a lot of things. I think, number one, when you have an iconic, athletic, figure such as Deion that has a persona and, the credentials he's had, playing professionally as well as collegiately, it means a lot. It brings a lot of capital, social, cultural capital to Jackson State University and to the HBCU community.
I'm an NFL fan, right? So I know coaching matters. Coaching is huge. But what did he implement for JSU that made a difference?
When you talk about, being a coach, there's a combination of things. There's a variety of different types of coaches, leadership styles. And I think Deion probably fits into a very charismatic leadership style. And that in and of itself motivate a lot of people. So regardless of your talent level, as a player, you will want to bring your A game or A plus game every time. So I think he has that ability to motivate, players that aren't necessarily 5-star athletes, players that, necessarily couldn't make it to the next level, to a Power 5 conference. So he brings that type of, motivation, that, again, that charisma to bring players, to another level, to, increase their, playing abilities. So that's tremendous when you talk about, the talent level that you have to work with at some of these institutions.
What are the differences in resources that HBCUs athletically have versus predominantly white institutions?
It's tremendous. If you were to think about the number one revenue generating team or university athletic wise in the nation, it's Oregon at number one. And you're talking about $391 million is their operating budget. Okay. The nearest HBCU falls around 18.7 million. You're talking apples and oranges, right? You're talking.
And who is that? Is that FAMU?
Prairie View is the highest ranking, I think, of the HBCUs. So, and then from there, you have a cluster of HBCUs falling around 18 million, 17 million. But, you're comparing 300 million right? To 8, you have a lot more resources. You have a lot more when you talk about facilities and just, you talk about support in general. It's a tremendous amount of difference.
Sanders' time at Jackson State University was chronicled in a Barstool sports series called Coach Prime. Here's a clip where he's talking with some of his players.
We have an expectation. I know some of y'all don't have an expectation in yourself because it's been such a long time since you really excel and you really ball. But we have an expectation of dominance. We have an expectation that we're going to go to the next level. We have an expectation that we're going to win. I have an expectation that I want you to go pro. I'm sitting on interviews all darn day talking about y'all, talking about the expectation, talking about what we're capable of doing. But some of y'all got to really get serious and focus because that draft is going to come and go. And you have no plan for life. You have no plan for life. You have nothing. If football don't work out, what you going to do?
What's sort of the difference in how an HBCU mentors and talks to their athletes as opposed to a predominantly white institution? Because as nice as that speech is from Deion, I think almost any coach could give you that speech. Almost any coach today who cares about their team would say, do you all have a plan if this whole football, basketball, or soccer thing doesn't work out?
The difference is the context. The HBCU context is different in terms of nurturing the holistic perspective of not only the Black athlete, but also the Black student. You don't necessarily have sort of this cadre of leadership to help nurture that whole person at PWI. So I think the context makes a big difference when you talk about that speech, right? Because I'm quite sure they're hearing it in the classroom. There's this, a consistent type of message that's being received or being presented at HBCUs that's not at PWIs.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more on Deion Sanders, race, and coaching in college sports. This is A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned. This episode of A Word is brought to you by Season 3 of The Relentless, a podcast from Slate Studios and Century 21 Real Estate. Even the best entrepreneurs know that running a business comes with challenges and setbacks. But you don't have to eliminate these obstacles to find success. You just have to know how to face them. This season of The Relentless teaches you how to move fearlessly and overcome the barriers holding you back. Author and entrepreneur Kristen Meinzer speaks with the most fascinating guests. Tune in to meet the titan of the tech world who becomes the first Peruvian and openly gay woman to climb the 7 summits. Also hear from a former elite poker player who will transform the way you think about making big decisions. Whether you work in sales or just want to hear stories from successful individuals turning fear into inspiration, The Relentless is here to help you move fearlessly. Season 3 of The Relentless is out now. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This is Jason Johnson, host of A Word, Slate's podcast about race and politics and everything else. I want to take a moment to welcome our new listeners. If you've discovered A Word and like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And let us know what you think by writing us at aword@slate.com. Thank you. You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're talking about Deion Sanders' decision to leave Jackson State football with Professor Billy Hawkins. For some folks, Deion Sanders leaving Jackson State calls to mind another notorious departure of a very famous sports star.
The answer to the question everybody wants to know. LeBron, what's your decision?
In this fall, man, this is very tough. In this fall, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach and join the Miami Heat.
Miami Heat. That was the conclusion you woke up with this morning.
That was the conclusion I woke up with this morning.
Some people are making the comparison between Deion leaving Jackson State and LeBron leaving Cleveland. I'll say this. I think they're vastly different, right? To me, LeBron James was leaving a large business and choosing to go someplace else where he would be more successful. Whereas Deion Sanders literally said that God brought him to come in and take care of Black people in HBCUs, and that the white man's ice water ain't colder. And then the moment he had a chance, he went to another school. In your view, do you see these things as similar? Because there are some people who say, hey, look, it's simply a Black man trying to find a better opportunity in sports, and we're holding Deion to an unfair double standard.
In terms of Deion, and, it sort of borders on the Messiah complex, in terms of how he was, sort of received this message and was sent to Jackson State as a savior. And I think that's prevalent in Black communities. We have not only a Messiah complex, but we have this Messiah fixation where we're looking for these types of leaderships, charismatic leaders to come up and to save us, right? That weighs a lot. And especially when you talk about the religious fervor of Black communities, right? When you talk about God said something, and here we have a community that take God's word serious, and those who are sent by God, we take that serious. So, when you weigh that in, I think there is some, significant difference when we talk about Deion and LeBron James. Now, the thing that I think is important, right? We're talking about athletes migrating, even at the high school level, we have this migration that's taking place at an early age. But definitely at the collegiate level now, especially when you talk about the transfer portal, athletes are migrating here and there across the country. The years of Eddie Robinson are gone, with, a coach that stays 57 years, And the same thing with players, professional players staying on a team and building a dynasty is very rare, So there's this tremendous amount of migration that takes place. And we're dealing with these capitalistic owners and operation when we talk about professional sport as well as collegiate sport. I can't deny, this idea that he's human, right? And there's a better offer. He has to take that under consideration. And I can't say that God didn't say, move to Colorado. Right. If God gave him one mission, he could have gave him another.
So you were quoted as saying that Black colleges have an expectation, one that's out of step with other programs, that successful coaches will stay for a long time. One, where do you think that expectation comes from? And two, in the case specifically of Deion Sanders, he wasn't there that long. I mean, he was basically there for just 2 years. Do you think that if he had stayed maybe just 4, maybe just so his son could graduate, that there would be less consternation on the part of many fans, both at Jackson State and at other HBCUs?
I think it would have weighed differently in his favor, if he would have stayed, obviously been successful and at least saw several of the guys he recruited, right, that had transferred to graduate through the HBCU system. I think it would have meant something different. He probably would have always came up under criticism because, again, if God sent him there, he's supposed to be there to stay and to stay indefinitely until, again, God releases him. That's the sort of this, paradigm we're operating in. I don't know if staying longer would have, prevented this criticism. But definitely when you think about this loyalty that supposedly endemic at HBCUs, it is deconstructed when we look at the Deion Sanders movement.
Why do you think within our community there's a belief that, hey, you have to be loyal to institutions that can't support you, whereas we're perfectly comfortable with Black folk jumping from place to place in a professional environment?
When you think about HBCUs and sort of the history of HBCUs, there is this sense of loyalty that is pervasive, right? And if you're there, you're there, you're meant to be there, and you're there to, obviously to motivate youth to be better and to be much more productive citizens. At a PWI, because we look at it purely as a business operation, PWI athletics is purely a business operation. So, the firing of coaches come with the territory. I don't know if and this has been one of the fallacies with the transitioning of a lot of HBCUs, they haven't taken the business aspect seriously enough, definitely in terms of being able to generate revenue and be sustainable as an athletic department. And if they want to be successful, right, and especially when you talk about generating revenue, bringing in sponsors, treating it as a business, maybe the model they have to take, and cutting people loose when they're not being successful or not necessarily recruiting successfully, winning the right bowl games, championships. That may be the model they have to take. I don't necessarily agree with that. This corporate athleticism that is, sort of pervasive at PWIs. I don't necessarily agree with that because, again, the context is totally different when you look at HBCUs, and it should be different.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more about Deion Sanders and Black college sports with Professor Billy Hawkins. This is A Word with Jason Johnson. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Dahlia Lithwick, host of Slate's Amicus podcast, and I'm here to tell you that we have a special offer on Slate memberships. You can now get 3 months of Slate Plus for just $15, and you'll get no ads on any Slate podcasts, member-exclusive episodes and segments on my show Amicus, and shows like Political Gabfest and Slow Burn, and unlimited reading on the Slate site. And best of all, you would be supporting all of Slate's independent journalism as we cover everything that is happening in the news every day. Sign up for Slate Plus at slate.com/podcasts plus. Again, that's 3 months for only $15. So sign up now at slate.com/podcasts plus.
You're listening to A Word with Jason Johnson. Today, we're talking about college football coach Deion Sanders and the future of Black college athletics with Professor Billy Hawkins. One of the things that Sanders is credited with doing is getting big-time high school talent to seriously consider Jackson State in particular, but also HBCUs overall. How do you think this is going to affect recruiting at HBCUs, not just at Jackson State, but across the MEAC and the SWAC and the CIAA?
One of the things that we have to think about is the timing of Deion Sanders and his ability to attract those players. Now, there was a movement, a shift of Black athletes, that were beginning to transition to HBCUs because of the radicalization of white supremacy, and the rise of white nationalism and, all of the hostility that was taking place. He sort of caught that wave, right, where there were these athletes that were thinking HBCUs, be a better place, better environment, don't have to deal with, again, the microaggression, racism, the fear of life, on these predominantly white campuses. I think that will continue as long as, we have this resurgence of white supremacy, right? Resurgence of white nationalism, I should say. However, he's left a void, right? So there has to be, a coach of his caliber, when you talk about personality, you talk about charisma, that can continue to attract those type athletes. So I think, that is the most important thing is, he set a model, he's created this model, and hopefully there are other coaches that will also take the lead and continue to recruit those athletes, especially when you talk about, challenging the conferences to increase revenue sources so that they can compete with some of the PWIs that they're losing these athletes to.
So Deion Sanders goes to Jackson State. He does great. He wins a ton of games, only has 5 losses, goes to championships. That's wonderful. Now, Professor Hawkins, he's at the University of Colorado. This is a team that was 1-11 last year, hasn't been successful in a long time. What does a good year for Deion Sanders look like? Because he's not going to be supported by HBCU culture anymore. They ain't going to be people swag surfing in the crowd the way they were down in Mississippi. What has he got to do next year in the Power 5 conference for this move to make sense?
I think he'll probably have a honeymoon phase, right? Maybe 6 months of honeymoon phase, until about October. And he has to be successful. Coming out the gate, he has to be successful. He has to be able to at least, take this team above 500 his first year. And I'm thinking, in terms of being able to nurture the support he needs from donors, from, obviously the student body there. I think he has to, sort of win them over, and I think he's been doing that. It's been up and down. It's been a roller coaster where, he's caused some friction, obviously, with players leaving, but that's typical when a coach comes in. So I think if he, sort of is able to produce and deliver, right? He's able to win over and to, because you're talking about a community that, even though they've produced some high caliber Black athletes, I don't know if they've had any Black head coaches. I don't think, he may be the first, right? So that is a, tremendous amount of burden that he's, having to, carry coming into that type of system. So again, he has to be successful.
Back in 2020, Deion Sanders said that George Floyd's murder, in part, not in total, but in part, inspired his decision to coach at an HBCU. Is there anything in this sort of post-George Floyd world that still remains in sort of HBCU culture that will last beyond this, right? Is there still something there where people are saying, you know what? I still see these places of value. I still see meaning in these institutions. I still see, as a large corporation, a value in investing in these institutions because of George Floyd. Or do you think Deion leaving is sort of the internal sign that like, okay, this is over and now we're back to status quo?
No, I think, he's probably just a little glitch, and significant, obviously. But most of my research centers around PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and HBCUs, and looking at sort of the difference between Black athletes at predominantly white institutions and Black athletes at HBCUs. And I think the most important thing is looking at how Black athletes that transfer from predominantly white institutions to HBCUs, how they feel a sense of community. They feel, a sense of belonging at these institutions. They talk about the different coaching environments where coaches are, much more father figures in terms of their nurturing and mentoring. And I think these are some important things that we have to take in consideration when we talk about the significance of HBCU athletics. Athletes that are, conscious and want to, sort of play in an environment that they don't have to, worry about, again, racism, overt, covert racism. I think they want to have that type of experience as well as students, a lot of bodies. So I think the significance of HBCUs will remain because, again, until white supremacy is eradicated, we're definitely going to need Black institutions, right, to not only instill in Black people their worth, right, but also to educate a population that PWIs can't or won't.
Billy Hawkins is a professor of health and human performance at the University of Houston and the author of the book, The New Plantation, Black Athletes, College Sports, and Predominantly White NCAA Institutions. Professor Billy Hawkins, thanks so much for joining me on A Word.
Thank you, Jason.
And that's A Word for this week. The show's email is aword@slate.com. This episode was produced by Kristie Taiwo-Makanjuola. Ben Richmond is Slate's Senior Director of Operations for Podcasts. Alicia Montgomery is the Vice President of Audio. Our theme music was produced by Don Will. I'm Jason Johnson. Tune in next week for A Word.